The mountains of northern Wyoming didn't forgive mistakes. Julian, ghost. Mercer understood this the way a man understands breathing, instinctively, without thought, carved into muscle memory from years of living on the razor's edge between survival and oblivion. At 36, he carried the weight of 1,000 nights in places where mercy was a myth and tomorrow was never promised. But here, in the crystalline silence of the Teton wilderness, he was trying to remember what peace felt like. The cabin he'd rented sat at the end of a forgotten logging road, 12 miles from the nearest town of Ridgeline, population 847. It was a simple structure of weathered pine and stone, perched on the shoulder of a mountain that looked down over a valley so pristine it hurt to look at. No cell service, no neighbors, no missions, just the wind through the pines and the weight of silence he was learning to carry differently. Julian stood on the porch in the pre-dawn cold, steam rising from the mug of black coffee in his hands. His breath plumed white in the February air. The thermometer nailed to the cabin wall read 8 degrees, but the wind made it feel like something meaner. He wore thermal layers under a worn flannel shirt, jeans that had seen better days, and boots that had walked through deserts and mountains on 3 continents. His body was a map of service, a scar on his left shoulder from shrapnel in Helmand Province, another along his ribs from a knife fight in Yemen that officially never happened, and hands calloused from years of holding rifles, climbing ropes, and pulling brothers out of hell. But the deepest scars were the ones no one could see, the ones that woke him at 3 a.m. with his heart hammering and the taste of copper in his mouth. He was on mandatory leave, 28 days ordered by the Navy after his last deployment, when the psych eval had noted elevated stress indicators and detachment from emotional processing. Translation: the job was eating him alive, and command wanted to make sure he didn't become a liability. So here he was, trying to outrun ghosts in a place where the only sounds were honest ones: wind, water, wildlife. No explosions, no screaming, just the kind of quiet that was supposed to heal you but somehow made the noise in your head louder. A low woof broke his thoughts. Julian looked down at the massive German shepherd sitting at his feet. Titan was 85 pounds of trained lethality wrapped in a sable coat that gleamed like oiled bronze in the early light. The dog's ears were erect, swiveling like radar dishes, his amber eyes scanning the tree line with the calm, systematic focus of a professional. "Easy, buddy," Julian murmured, his voice still rough from sleep. "Nothing out there but deer and maybe a fox." Titan's tail thumped once against the porch boards, but his gaze never left the forest. The dog had been Julian's partner for 4 years, deployed together in Afghanistan, Iraq, and places that didn't appear on any official reports. Titan had pulled him from a collapsed building in Kandahar. Julian had carried the dog 3 miles through enemy territory after Titan took a bullet meant for him. When Julian's enlistment ended and he'd taken this leave, Titan had come with him. Retired military working dogs often went to adoption, but Julian had made it clear: Titan was his, or he wasn't leaving the service. Command had signed the papers without argument. Some bonds were too deep to sever with bureaucracy. "Come on," Julian said, setting his mug on the railing. "Let's burn off some energy before this storm hits." The weather forecast had been ominous. A blizzard rolling down from Canada, expected to dump 2 feet of snow across the northern Rockies by nightfall. Julian had stocked up on supplies 2 days ago, enough to weather a week if the roads got impassable. He'd lived through worse. A Wyoming winter was a vacation compared to a firefight at altitude in the Hindu Kush. They set off down the trail, Julian's stride long and measured, Titan trotting beside him with effortless grace. The forest around them was cathedral quiet, towering ponderosa pines and Douglas firs standing like pillars beneath a sky the color of old steel. Snow crunched beneath their boots and paws, the only sound in the vast stillness. This was the routine Julian had built over the past 2 weeks. Rise before dawn, coffee on the porch, a long run or hike with Titan, return to the cabin, chop wood, read, sleep, repeat. No objectives, no extraction points, no rules of engagement, just existence, one breath at a time. He wanted it to be enough. But the truth gnawed at him in the quiet moments. He didn't know who he was without the mission. For 15 years his identity had been simple. Navy SEAL, Team 6 operator, the man who went into the dark so others could sleep safely in the light. Now, stripped of that purpose, he felt like a weapon sitting on a shelf, useful but unused, necessary but unwanted. The trail wound through a stand of aspens, their white bark stark against the shadows. Titan suddenly stopped, head cocked, one paw raised. Julian's hand instinctively went to his hip, where his sidearm usually rested. But he'd left it at the cabin today, a conscious choice. He was trying to be civilian. "What is it, boy?" The dog's ears flattened slightly, and a low rumble vibrated through his chest. Not a growl of aggression, but a warning. Something wasn't right. Julian scanned the tree line, his senses sharpening instantly. Years of training turned his body into a weapon system without conscious thought. Heart rate slowing, breathing deepening, vision narrowing to pick up movement. He saw nothing, heard nothing. But Titan never gave false alerts. "Show me," Julian whispered. The dog moved forward slowly, nose to the ground, tracking something Julian couldn't see. They left the trail, pushing through underbrush dusted with snow. The terrain sloped downward, and after 50 yards, they reached a small clearing where the morning light broke through the canopy in pale shafts. There, half buried in snow, was a child's backpack. Julian's chest tightened. He approached carefully, kneeling to examine it without touching. The pack was pink, decorated with faded unicorn stickers. One strap was torn. It looked like it had been here for hours, maybe overnight, slowly disappearing beneath fresh snowfall. He looked at Titan. "Find," he commanded softly. The dog circled once, then locked onto a scent trail leading deeper into the forest, toward the higher elevations where the terrain became rougher and the trees thicker. Julian's mind raced. A lost child in this wilderness with a blizzard coming? The odds of survival were grim. He pulled the emergency radio from his coat pocket, a handheld unit he'd brought more out of habit than expectation of needing it. He keyed the mic. "Ridgeline Dispatch, this is Julian Mercer at the Black Pine Trail Access. I found what appears to be a child's backpack in the woods. Possible lost hiker. Request an immediate search and rescue response." Over. Static hissed back at him. He tried again. Nothing. The mountains blocked the signal. Julian looked at the trail disappearing into the trees, then at Titan, who was already moving, following the scent with single-minded focus. The peace he'd been trying to find evaporated like morning mist. The mission had found him. "Let's go," Julian said, and they ran into the forest, leaving the quiet behind. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 48 hours earlier, 9-year-old Emma Hartley had been sitting in the back seat of her mother's SUV, watching the mountains roll past the window like a slideshow of giants. Her nose was pressed against the glass, breath fogging the surface as she traced patterns with her finger. "Mom, how much longer?" she asked for the third time in an hour. Sarah Hartley glanced at her daughter in the rearview mirror, her expression soft with the kind of patience only mothers possess. She was 34, with honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. A single mother, a nurse at Ridgeline Regional Hospital, and someone who had learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. "Another hour, sweetie. I promise the cabin will be worth it." Emma wrinkled her nose but didn't complain. She understood, even at 9, that this trip was special. Her mom had saved for months to rent a cabin for the long weekend, a rare break from double shifts and bill juggling. It was supposed to be their adventure, just the two of them, away from the small apartment that always smelled like hospital disinfectant, no matter how many candles her mom burned. In her lap, Emma held her most prized possession, a worn, stuffed rabbit named Captain Fluffles. Missing one button eye and held together with so many stitches, he looked like he'd survived a war. She'd had him since she was 3, and despite her mother's offers to buy a new toy, Emma refused. Captain Fluffles had been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every moment when the world felt too big and she felt too small. "Will there be snow?" Emma asked, her voice bright with hope. "Probably," Sarah said with a smile. "The forecast says there might be a storm, but we'll be safe and warm inside. We can build a fire, make hot chocolate, maybe even build a snowman if it's not too cold." Emma's face lit up. She'd seen snow before. Ridgeline got its share every winter, but never like the deep mountain snow her teacher had described, the kind that came up past your knees and made the whole world look like a fairy tale. They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange. It was smaller than the pictures online had suggested, but Sarah didn't say anything. Emma bounded out of the car, Captain Fluffles tucked under one arm, marveling at the tall trees and the way the wind whispered through them. "It's perfect, Mom," she called out, spinning in a circle. Sarah felt her chest loosen for the first time in months. Maybe this would be enough. Maybe this small moment of happiness would carry them through the hard months ahead, when the medical bills came due and the car needed repairs they couldn't afford. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours, everything would shatter. That night, they roasted marshmallows over the fireplace, read stories by lamplight, and fell asleep to the sound of wind rattling the windows. Emma dreamed of snow angels and laughter. Sarah dreamed of rest. But in the deep hours before dawn, when the world was at its darkest, Sarah woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up, heart hammering. "Emma?" No answer. She stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, fumbling for the light switch. The main room was empty. The front door stood open, swinging gently in the wind, snow swirling across the threshold. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, running outside in bare feet and a thin nightgown, the cold biting into her skin like teeth. Footprints led away from the cabin, small ones mixed with larger boot prints. Tire tracks scarred the snow where a vehicle had been parked. Sarah ran blindly into the trees, screaming her daughter's name until her throat was raw, until her feet were numb and bleeding, until the forest swallowed her voice and gave nothing back. By the time she stumbled back to the cabin and called 911, 40 minutes had passed. By the time the Ridgeline Sheriff's Department arrived, an hour. By the time they organized a search, the storm had begun, erasing every trace. Now, 2 days later, Sarah Hartley sat in a gray room at the sheriff's station, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like strangers, her, hands trembling around a cup of cold coffee. Her eyes were hollow, red-rimmed, staring at nothing. Deputy Collins, a young man with kind eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his belt, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartley, I know this is hard, but we need you to go through it one more time. Anything you remember?" "I've told you everything," Sarah whispered, her voice brittle. "Someone broke in. They took her. Emma's out there, and you're not doing enough." Sheriff Marcus Dalton stepped into the doorway. He was a large man in his early 50s, with a face carved from stone and eyes that gave away nothing. He'd been sheriff of Ridgeline for 12 years, and in that time, he'd cultivated a reputation as tough but fair. What no one knew was that fairness had a price, and Marcus Dalton had been quietly collecting payments for years. "We're doing everything we can, Mrs. Hartley," he said, his tone measured. "But with this storm, search operations are limited. We've got teams out there, but visibility is near zero." Sarah looked up at him, desperation spilling over. "She's 9 years old. She has asthma. She doesn't have her inhaler. Please, I understand," Dalton interrupted gently. "But we have to be realistic. The temperature's dropping. If she's out there—" He didn't finish the sentence. Sarah crumpled, sobs tearing through her body. Dalton watched her for a moment, then turned and walked back to his office. Once inside, he closed the door and pulled out his personal cell phone. He dialed a number he'd called too many times before. "It's me," he said quietly. "We have a problem." The voice on the other end was calm, cold. "The girl? Still missing. But we've got a civilian poking around, some ex-military guy renting a cabin near the Black Pine Trail. If he finds something before we clean this up, then make sure he doesn't." The line went dead. Dalton set the phone down and stared out the window at the snow falling in thick, relentless sheets. He'd made a deal with the devil years ago, trading integrity for cash that kept his dying ranch afloat and his ex-wife's medical bills paid. Now the bill was coming due, and an innocent child was the currency. He reached for his coat, his jaw set. Outside, the storm howled, swallowing the town in white. The warehouse sat on the outskirts of Ridgeline, hidden behind a failing lumber mill that hadn't processed a log in 5 years. The structure was corrugated steel and concrete, windowless, anonymous, the kind of building you drove past without noticing, which was exactly the point. Inside, the air was thick with cold and the smell of motor oil. A single overhead light swung gently, casting shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls. Wooden crates were stacked in neat rows stenciled with shipping codes that meant nothing to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Victor Crane stood in the center of the space, his breath steaming. He was tall and lean, 42 years old, with the kind of face that suggested intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. His dark hair was graying at the temples, cut short and professional. He wore an expensive wool coat over a tailored suit, out of place in rural Wyoming, but Victor had never cared about fitting in. He was here for business, not community. Behind him, 3 men waited. They weren't hired muscle. They were professionals, the kind who did wet work for organizations that didn't officially exist. Ex-military, ex-intelligence, ex-everything except the willingness to do what needed to be done for the right price. The first was Garrett Voss, a former Army Ranger with a face like hammered leather and eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. He carried himself with the loose confidence of a man who knew he could kill everyone in the room and still make his dinner reservation. The second was Luis Navarro, younger, faster, a knife specialist who'd worked cartel enforcement in Sinaloa before the money, and the bodies got to be too much. He had a tattoo of Santa Muerte on his forearm and a rosary wrapped around his knuckles. Faith and violence intertwined. The third was simply called Dutch, a demolitions expert with burn scars running up his neck and a smile that never reached his eyes. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. Victor checked his watch, then looked at the men. "Where's Dalton?" "On his way," Voss said, his voice a low rumble. "Said he had to handle the mother." Victor's jaw tightened. The mother should have been handled 2 days ago. "She won't be a problem," Dutch said, his voice soft and rasping. "Nobody believes hysterical single mothers anyway. That's not the point." Victor turned, his gaze sharp. "The point is containment. Every loose end is a risk. Every witness is a liability." Navarro leaned against a crate, cleaning his nails with a folding knife. "What about the girl?" Victor was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold. "The girl was never supposed to be here. That was Dalton's mess. He assured me the cabin would be empty." "So, what do we do with her?" Voss pressed. Before Victor could answer, the warehouse door groaned open. Sheriff Marcus Dalton stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders. He looked older than he had that morning, the weight of his choices etched into the lines around his mouth. "We have a complication," Dalton said without preamble. Victor's expression didn't change. "Explain." "There's a guy, Julian Mercer, ex-Navy SEAL, renting the Black Pine cabin. He radioed in about finding a child's backpack. He's tracking into the woods." Victor's eyes narrowed. And if he finds what we've got stashed at the old Miller property—" Dalton didn't finish. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Victor stepped closer, his voice quiet. "Marcus, when we started this arrangement, I was very clear about the terms. You provide access and silence. I provide the money that keeps your pathetic life afloat. But if you've allowed a Navy SEAL to stumble into the middle of our operation—" "I didn't allow anything," Dalton snapped, then caught himself. "Look, I'll handle it. I'll send deputies out to intercept him. Tell him the search is being coordinated, and he needs to stay clear." "That won't work," Voss said flatly. "SEALs don't take orders from local cops, especially not when there's a missing kid involved." Victor turned to his men. "Then we do this the other way." Navarro's knife stopped moving. "You want us to take out a SEAL?" "I want you to make sure he doesn't interfere," Victor corrected. "If that means elimination, so be it. But make it look like an accident. The storm provides cover." Dalton's face paled. "You can't just murder a civilian." "He stopped being a civilian the moment he picked up that backpack," Victor interrupted. "And you stopped having a say in this the moment you cashed my check. Now get out. You've done enough damage." Dalton stood frozen for a moment, the full weight of what he'd become settling on his shoulders. Then he turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. Victor watched him go, then addressed his men. "Voss, take Navarro, find this Mercer. Dutch, you're with me. We're moving the operation up. I want everything out of the Miller property and onto the trucks by midnight." "And the girl?" Dutch asked again. Victor's expression was unreadable. "She's leverage now. Keep her alive and quiet. If the mother becomes too much of a problem, we'll use her to ensure silence." Voss nodded and headed for the door, Navarro following. Dutch pulled on his gloves, flexing his scarred fingers. "One more thing," Victor called after them. "This SEAL, don't underestimate him. Men like that are dangerous even when they're unarmed." Voss paused, looking back. "How do you want it done?" Victor's smile was thin and cold. "However necessary. Just make sure he doesn't make it down the mountain." The door closed, and the warehouse fell silent again except for the wind howling through gaps in the steel. Victor pulled out his phone and made a call. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, professional and clipped. "Status?" she asked. "Minor complication. Being handled." "It better be. The buyers are already en route. If this shipment doesn't move—" "It will move," Victor interrupted. "Everything is under control." He ended the call and stared at the rows of crates. Inside them were weapons, military-grade rifles, ammunition, explosives, stolen from a National Guard depot 3 months ago and now being sold to the highest bidder. A simple operation made possible by a corrupt sheriff and a network of people who valued profit over principle. The girl had been an accident. Wrong place, wrong time. Her mother had rented a cabin that was supposed to be a dead drop location, and when Victor's men arrived to move the shipment, they'd found them there. So they'd taken the girl, silenced the situation, and bought themselves time. But time was running out, and now there was a Navy SEAL in the woods with a dog trained to find people. Victor Crane had built his empire on contingency plans and cold calculations. He would handle this the way he handled everything, with precision and without remorse. Outside, the blizzard thickened, turning the world into a wall of white that swallowed sound and light. Somewhere in that storm, a 9-year-old girl sat in darkness, crying for her mother. And somewhere else, a warrior and his dog were hunting. The cold was a living thing now, pressing against Julian's skin with relentless fingers. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees in the last hour, and the wind carried the sharp bite of the coming storm. Snow fell in thick curtains, reducing visibility to less than 20 yards. But Titan didn't need to see. The German shepherd moved through the forest with unwavering focus, nose low, following a scent trail that Julian couldn't perceive. The dog paused occasionally, recalibrating, then surged forward again. They'd been tracking for 90 minutes, climbing steadily into rougher terrain where the trees thinned and exposed granite pushed through the snow like broken bones. Julian's breath came in controlled bursts, his body moving with the fluid economy of a man who'd spent years carrying heavy loads through hostile territory. His mind was already in mission mode, cataloging threats, calculating angles, preparing for contact. A child's backpack, a scent trail leading away from civilization, a storm that would erase evidence within hours. This wasn't an accident. This was an abduction. The question was, by whom and why? Titan stopped abruptly, ears pricking forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Julian dropped to a crouch, scanning the tree line. Ahead, barely visible through the snow, was a structure. An old cabin, half collapsed, its roof caved in on one side. But there was smoke rising from a metal chimney pipe still attached to the intact portion. Someone was inside. Julian moved forward cautiously, keeping to cover. As he approached, he saw tire tracks in the snow, fresh, less than an hour old. A vehicle had been here recently. Multiple sets of boot prints led to and from the cabin door. Titan's hackles rose, his body going rigid. The dog sensed danger, and so did Julian. He circled around, approaching from the blind side, and peered through a gap in the rotted wood siding. Inside, illuminated by a battery-powered lantern, he saw her, A little girl, maybe 9 or 10, sat on the floor in the corner. Her wrists were bound with zip ties, her mouth covered with duct tape. She wore a thin pajama set and a winter coat that was too big for her, probably thrown on her in haste. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror, and she was alone. Julian's jaw clenched. Rage flooded through him, cold and sharp. Whoever had done this had left a child in a freezing, collapsing structure with a storm bearing down. They either didn't care if she died or they were counting on it. He scanned the interior. No guards, no cameras that he could see. Just the girl and a small propane heater that was already sputtering, nearly out of fuel. Julian moved to the door, tested it. Locked from the outside with a chain and padlock. He could pick it, but that would take time. Time they didn't have. He signaled Titan to stay, then moved around to the collapsed section of the cabin. The roof had caved inward, creating a gap large enough to slip through. He climbed carefully, testing each handhold, the old wood groaning under his weight. He dropped inside, landing softly on the balls of his feet. The girl jerked, a muffled scream escaping around the tape. Her eyes went even wider, fear of a new threat. Julian raised his hands slowly, keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He pulled off his beanie so she could see his face clearly. "Easy," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." She stared at him, trembling violently. Julian knelt a few feet away, maintaining distance. "My name is Julian. I found your backpack on the trail. Are you Emma?" The girl's eyes widened in recognition. She nodded frantically. "Okay, Emma. I'm going to take the tape off now. It might hurt a little, but I need you to stay quiet. Can you do that for me?" Another nod. Julian moved closer slowly, reaching for the edge of the tape. On 3, 1, 2, he pulled it off quickly. Emma gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's okay," Julian murmured, pulling out his pocket knife and carefully cutting the zip ties. "You're safe now. I've got you." Emma's hands came free, and she immediately threw her arms around him, sobbing into his coat. Julian felt something crack inside his chest. The same protective instinct that had driven him to carry wounded teammates, to shield civilians, to stand between the innocent and the darkness. "Where's my mom?" Emma whispered, her voice hoarse. "She's looking for you," Julian said gently. "We're going to get you back to her. But first, I need to know how many men were here." Emma pulled back, wiping her nose. 3. They came to our cabin. They broke the window. One of them grabbed me while I was sleeping. They put me in a truck and brought me here." "Did they say anything? Any names?" "The big one. They called him Voss. He was scary. He said they'd come back for me later, but if I made noise, they'd hurt my mom." Julian's blood ran cold. "When did they leave?" "I don't know. Maybe an hour ago," which meant they could be back any minute. Julian stood, pulling Emma to her feet. "We need to move. Fast. Can you run?" "I think so." "Good girl." He handed her his beanie. "Put this on. Stay close to me." He climbed back through the roof gap, then reached down and pulled Emma up. The wind hit them immediately, fierce and biting. Emma gasped, but Julian steadied her. "We've got about 3 miles to my cabin," he said. "Can you make it?" She nodded, determination flashing through the fear. "That's my brave girl. Let's go." They dropped to the ground. Titan was waiting, and when he saw Emma, his entire demeanor changed. The tactical dog became a protector, moving to her side and pressing against her leg, offering warmth and comfort. Emma touched his head tentatively. "Is he yours?" "He's my partner," Julian said. "His name's Titan, and he's going to help keep you safe." They started moving. Julian setting a pace fast enough to make distance, but slow enough for Emma to keep up. The storm was intensifying, snow falling so thick it was like moving through a white curtain. They'd gone maybe half a mile when Titan stopped and growled. Julian's hand went to the knife on his belt, the only weapon he had. He pushed Emma behind him. "Stay close," he whispered. Then he heard it, the rumble of an engine growing louder. Through the trees ahead, headlights cut through the storm. They'd found them. The headlights swept across the trees like searchlights, and Julian's mind moved into combat mode with the smooth, lethal efficiency of years of training. He had seconds to make a decision: fight or evade. With Emma beside him, unarmed except for a knife, in the middle of a blizzard, the tactical choice was clear. Evade. "Down," he hissed, pulling Emma behind a fallen log. Titan dropped beside her, his body covering hers. Julian pressed himself into the snow, eyes tracking the vehicle. It was a black pickup truck, modified with a lift kit and oversized tires, built for rough terrain. It rolled slowly down the old logging road, headlights cutting back and forth as the driver searched. The truck stopped 50 yards away. 2 men climbed out. The first was massive, 6'4", maybe 250, with the squared-off build of someone who'd spent years in a gym and a battlefield. Military bearing in every movement. This had to be Voss. The second was smaller, quicker, with a predatory grace that marked him as a knife fighter. Navarro, Julian guessed. "Tracks lead this way," Voss called out, his voice carrying over the wind. He held a tactical flashlight in one hand, a pistol in the other. Navarro moved into the trees, scanning. "Could be the seal Dalton warned us about." "Or a moose," Voss said. "Either way, we check it out." They split up, moving in a tactical search pattern. Professional, trained. Julian calculated angles. He could take one in close quarters, maybe both if he had surprise, but not without noise, not without risk of Emma getting caught in the crossfire. And then there was the question of what would happen if he killed them. Self-defense was one thing, but he was still bound by law. Killing 2 men, even armed criminals, without witnesses, without proof of imminent threat, would put him in legal hell. He needed to get Emma to safety first. Then he could deal with the hunters. He waited, barely breathing, as Navarro passed within 10 feet of their position. The man paused, scanning the area with his flashlight. Titan's muscles coiled, ready to attack on command. But Julian placed a hand on the dog's back. "Wait." After 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, Navarro moved on. "Nothing here," he called back to Voss. "Check the cabin again. Make sure the girl's still secure." Julian's jaw clenched. They didn't know yet. That bought time. The men climbed back into the truck and rolled forward toward the collapsed cabin. The moment the taillights disappeared into the storm, Julian moved. "Go. Now." They ran. Emma stumbled twice, but Julian caught her each time, half carrying her through the drifts. Titan ranged ahead, breaking trail through the deep snow. The wind howled around them, snow stinging their faces. Behind them, a shout echoed through the forest. "She's gone." Then the sound of the engine revving, turning around. Julian scanned ahead. They were still 2 miles from his cabin, and the truck would cover that distance in minutes. They needed cover, concealment, something to break line of sight. "There," he said, pointing toward a rocky outcropping 50 yards off the trail. "Up into those rocks." They scrambled up the slope, using tree roots and exposed stone for handholds. Emma's hands were red and raw from the cold, but she didn't complain. She climbed with the desperate strength of survival. They reached a narrow crevice between two boulders, just big enough to squeeze into. Julian pushed Emma inside, Titan following. He wedged himself in last, blocking the entrance with his body. The truck rolled past below them, headlights sweeping across the slope. Julian pressed his hand over Emma's mouth gently, feeling her rapid heartbeat against his palm. "Tracks disappear here," Voss's voice carried up from the road. "They went off trail." "We don't have time for this," Navarro snapped. "Crane wants everything moved by midnight. If we don't have the girl, then we find her and the seal," Voss interrupted, "because if they make it to town and start talking, we're all done." A pause, then Navarro, "I'll call for backup. We sweep the area systematically." "No," Voss said. "No calls, no trails. We do this quiet, spread out, move in a grid. They can't have gone far in this storm." The men separated, moving into the trees with their flashlights bobbing. Julian waited until they were out of sight, then whispered to Emma, "We're going to move again, but this time we stay off the trails completely. We go through the deep forest. Understand?" She nodded, shivering violently. Julian pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her. "Wear this." "But you'll freeze. I've been colder," he lied. "Let's go." They emerged from the rocks and moved perpendicular to the trail, pushing through underbrush and fallen timber. It was slower, harder, but it erased their tracks faster. The storm was their ally now, filling in their footprints almost as quickly as they made them. They traveled for another hour, Emma stumbling with exhaustion. Finally, through the trees ahead, Julian saw the dark shape of his cabin. "Almost there," he murmured. "You're doing great." They broke from the tree line and stumbled across the clearing. Julian unlocked the door, ushered Emma and Titan inside, then slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt. The warmth hit them like a wave. Emma collapsed onto the couch, shaking uncontrollably. Julian moved immediately to the fireplace, stirring the coals and adding wood until flames leapt up. Then he grabbed blankets and wrapped them around the girl. "Titan, guard," he commanded. The dog positioned himself by the door, ears erect, watching. Julian knelt in front of Emma. "You're safe now. I need to call for help. Then we're going to get you back to your mother." He pulled out his satellite phone, a backup he'd brought from his service days. It took a moment to acquire signal, then he dialed 911. The dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Julian Mercer at the Black Pine Trail cabin. I have Emma Hartley with me. She was abducted and held in an old cabin approximately 3 miles northeast of my location. There are at least 2 armed suspects still in the area, and I believe there's a larger operation involved. We need immediate law enforcement and medical response." A pause. "Can you repeat that?" "You have Emma Hartley?" "Yes, she's safe, but we need help now. The suspects may attempt to retrieve her. Stay on the line, sir. I'm dispatching units now." Julian kept the phone to his ear, but his eyes were on the window, watching the darkness beyond. Titan suddenly growled, low and menacing. The dog was staring at the door. Julian set down the phone and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. 3 sets of headlights were rolling slowly up the access road toward his cabin. They'd been found. Julian's training kicked in with crystalline clarity. He had maybe 2 minutes before the vehicles reached the cabin. 2 minutes to prepare for a siege with a terrified child, a dog, and no firearms except the hunting rifle locked in the bedroom closet. He sprinted to the bedroom, yanked open the gun safe, and pulled out a Remington 700, a bolt-action rifle he'd brought for hunting but never used. He grabbed a box of .308 ammunition and began loading. Emma watched from the couch, eyes wide. "Are they coming for me?" "They're coming," Julian said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "But they're not getting you, I promise." He locked the bolt, chambering around, then moved to the window. The 3 vehicles had stopped at the edge of the property, engines idling. Doors opened, and men emerged, 6 in total. They fanned out, moving with tactical precision. Voss was there, along with Navarro. The other 4 were new, more hired guns, and in the center of the group stood a man in an expensive coat, someone who carried himself with authority. Victor Crane. Julian didn't know the name yet, but he recognized the type. The man in charge, the one who stayed clean while others got bloody. Victor's voice carried across the clearing, amplified by the silence of the storm. "Julian Mercer, I know you're in there, and I know you have something that belongs to me." Julian didn't respond. "I'm a reasonable man," Victor continued. "You've stumbled into a situation that doesn't concern you. Walk away now, and no one gets hurt. Keep the girl, and this ends badly for everyone." Julian checked the rifle's sight, then moved to the door. He cracked it open 6 inches, just enough to be heard. "The only thing that ends badly is you," Julian called back, his voice carrying the flat, emotionless tone of a man who delivered ultimatums in a dozen languages. "The police are already on their way. Leave now, and maybe you have a chance to run." Victor laughed, a cold, calculating sound. "The police in this town work for me, Mr. Mercer. Sheriff Dalton made that call to me 30 minutes ago. No one is coming to help you." Julian's chest tightened. Corruption ran deep then. "Here's what's going to happen," Victor said, stepping forward. "You're going to send the girl out. Then you're going to forget you ever saw her. In exchange, I'll let you live. You have 60 seconds to decide." Julian glanced back at Emma. She was trembling, clutching Captain Fluffles to her chest. He looked at Titan. The dog's eyes were fixed on the door, every muscle coiled. Then Julian looked back at the men outside, and something cold and final settled in his chest. He'd spent 15 years going into the dark to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He'd made a promise to serve, to shield, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. That promise didn't end when he took off the uniform. 60 seconds are up," Julian called out. "Here's my answer." He raised the rifle and fired a single shot into the ground 5 feet in front of Victor's boots, snow erupting in a white plume. The message was clear. Victor's expression hardened. "Bad choice, Mr. Mercer." He gestured to his men. "Burn him out." Julian slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, knowing it would buy maybe 30 seconds. His mind cycled through options with the speed of a supercomputer running combat algorithms. The cabin had 2 entrances, front door and back door. 4 windows, all small. Thick log construction, but not bulletproof. No reinforced positions. No escape route except straight into gunfire. Tactically, he was in a coffin, but he'd fought his way out of worse. "Emma, bathroom. Now." He pointed toward the small interior room with no windows. "Take Titan. Lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you." "But, now." The command voice cut through her fear. She scrambled off the couch and ran, Titan at her heels. The bathroom door slammed shut. Julian moved to the kitchen, yanked open drawers. Knives, lighter fluid, duct tape, cleaning chemicals. His hands moved with purpose, assembling what he needed. Outside, he heard boots crunching in snow, men taking positions. Then Voss's voice. Light it up. The first Molotov cocktail shattered against the front window. Flames spread across the glass and frame, hungry and bright. Another hit the side wall, then another. The cabin began to fill with smoke. Julian wrapped a damp towel around his face and dropped to a crouch where the air was clearer. He moved to the shattered front window, staying low, and peered out. 4 men were visible, spread in an arc around the cabin. Voss and Navarro hung back, weapons ready. The other 2 were reloading bottles. Victor stood behind them all, watching like a general observing a siege. Julian raised the rifle, sighted, and fired. The closest man, a heavy-set mercenary with a shotgun, jerked backward, blood spraying from his shoulder. He went down screaming. Julian worked the bolt, chambered another round, fired again. The second man dove for cover behind a tree, but not fast enough. The .308 round punched through his thigh, spinning him into the snow. Suppressing fire, Voss roared. Gunfire erupted. Handguns, rifles, a shotgun boom. Bullets punched through the cabin walls, splintering wood, shattering dishes, tearing through furniture. Julian rolled away from the window, low crawling toward the back door. The smoke was thicker now, fire spreading across the ceiling beams. He had maybe 2 minutes before the whole structure became an oven. He checked the hunting rifle. 3 rounds left. Not enough. Time to get creative. Julian grabbed the can of lighter fluid and the roll of duct tape, moving to the back door. He cracked it open an inch, listening. Footsteps. Someone circling around a flank. Julian waited, controlling his breathing. The footsteps grew closer. A shadow crossed the threshold. Julian kicked the door open hard, slamming it into the man's face. The mercenary staggered back, and Julian lunged, driving the butt of the rifle into his solar plexus. The man doubled over, gasping. Julian stripped the weapon from his hands, a Glock 19. He checked the magazine. 15 rounds. Better. He zip-tied the man's hands with a length of paracord, then dragged him inside and shoved him into a corner. "Stay down and you live," Julian said flatly. The man nodded, blood streaming from his broken nose. Julian moved back to the front of the cabin. The fire was spreading faster now, heat pressing down like a physical weight. He could hear Emma coughing in the bathroom. They were out of time. He needed to thin the numbers and create an opening. Julian pulled a propane canister from under the stove, the backup tank for the grill. He unscrewed the valve slightly, letting gas hiss into the cabin, then wrapped the lighter fluid-soaked towel around it and duct-taped the whole assembly together. A crude bomb, but effective. He opened the front door and hurled it into the clearing. "Grenade!" someone shouted. Men scattered. The canister landed in the snow 15 feet away. Julian raised the Glock, sighted carefully, and fired. The bullet sparked off the metal tank. On the third shot, it ignited. The explosion was massive, a fireball that lit up the forest like daylight, the concussive wave slamming into the cabin and rattling the walls. Shrapnel and burning debris scattered in every direction. When the smoke cleared, 2 more men were down, one unconscious, the other crawling away with his coat on fire. That left Voss, Navarro, Victor, and 1 other. 4 against 1. Better odds. Julian grabbed the bathroom door handle. "Emma, we're moving. Stay behind me." The door opened. Emma stumbled out, coughing, eyes streaming. Titan pressed against her, guiding her. "Back door, go," Julian commanded. They burst out into the snow and the night. The cold hit like a hammer after the heat of the fire, but it was clean and breathable. Julian pushed Emma toward the tree line. "Run to the trees! Tighten! Guard!" The dog surged ahead with Emma, disappearing into the shadows. Julian turned back, Glock raised. Voss emerged from behind a vehicle, rifle swinging up. Julian fired first. 2 shots, center mass. Voss's body armor absorbed them, but the impact staggered him backward. Navarro came from the left, knife flashing. Julian pivoted, dropping low. The blade whistled past his ear. He drove an elbow into Navarro's ribs, heard bones crack, then brought the pistol around and fired point blank into the man's leg. Navarro collapsed, screaming. Voss was back up, advancing with grim determination. "You're good," he said, almost respectful. "But not good enough." He fired a 3-round burst. Julian dove behind a woodpile, rounds chewing through the logs. Splinters exploded around him. He was pinned. Then he heard it. A low, thunderous growl. Titan appeared from the darkness like a missile, 85 pounds of trained fury. The dog hit Voss from the side, jaws clamping onto his weapon arm. Voss roared, trying to shake free, but Titan held on with steel-trap determination. Julian rose and closed the distance, weapon raised. "Drop it," he said. Voss stared at him, blood running down his arm where Titan's teeth had punched through cloth and skin. His rifle dangled uselessly. Slowly, he let it fall. "Titan, out!" Julian commanded. The dog released, backing away but staying alert. Julian kept the Glock trained on Voss's chest. "On your knees." Voss knelt, jaw clenched. "You just killed yourself, Seal. You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I know enough," Julian said. "Where's the girl's mother?" "Safe. For now." "Where?" Voss smiled, blood on his teeth. "You want her? You'll have to deal with Crane. And he's not as forgiving as me." "Where is he?" A voice answered from behind him, cold and smooth. "Right here." Julian spun. Victor Crane stood 20 feet away, holding a pistol aimed directly at Emma, who was visible in the tree line, frozen with fear. "Drop your weapon, Mr. Mercer," Victor said calmly, "or I put a bullet in the child's head." Julian's finger tightened on the trigger, every instinct screaming to take the shot. But Victor was shielded behind a tree, only his arm and half his face visible. A difficult shot in daylight, nearly impossible in darkness and falling snow. And if Julian missed... He lowered the Glock. "Smart choice," Victor said. "Now, kick it away." Julian complied, the weapon sliding across the snow. Victor stepped out fully, pistol still trained on Emma. "I underestimated you. That won't happen again." "Let her go," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between you and me." "No," Victor corrected. "This is about business. The girl is collateral. Her mother saw things she shouldn't have. You interfered with an operation worth millions. Both problems need to be resolved." "The police are bought," Victor interrupted. "I already told you. Sheriff Dalton has been on my payroll for 3 years. No one is coming to save you." Julian's mind raced. He was unarmed, outnumbered, and outpositioned. Emma was in the kill zone. Titan couldn't cross 20 feet before Victor fired. He needed a miracle, or he needed to become one. "You're right," Julian said, raising his hand slowly. "I'm out of options. You win." Victor's eyes narrowed. "What are you—" Julian whistled, a sharp, 2-tone command. Titan exploded forward, not toward Victor, but toward Emma. The dog slammed into her, knocking her behind a tree just as Victor's gun barked. The shot went wide. Julian launched himself forward in the same instant, closing the 20 feet with explosive speed. Victor swung the gun toward him, fired twice. One round grazed Julian's ribs. The second missed. Then Julian was on him. He grabbed Victor's wrist, twisting the gun away, driving his knee into the man's stomach. Victor gasped, folding. Julian stripped the weapon, reversed it, and pressed the barrel against Victor's temple. "Don't move," he snarled. Victor froze, breathing hard. In the distance, sirens finally wailed. Real ones this time, multiple vehicles, lights flashing through the trees. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. Drop your weapons." Julian looked up to see black SUVs rolling into the clearing, agents spilling out with rifles raised. Not local police, federal. Someone had gotten the message. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. The lead FBI agent was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and the controlled demeanor of someone who'd seen enough violence to respect it. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Rachel Torres. She approached slowly, weapon lowered but ready. "Julian Mercer?" "That's me," Julian said, still holding the pistol to Victor's head. "Lower your weapon, Mr. Mercer. We've got it. From here." Julian hesitated, then stepped back, letting Victor collapse into the snow. Two agents immediately moved in, cuffing him. Torres holstered her sidearm and extended a hand. "We got a satellite call from your number about 40 minutes ago. When we ran your name through the system." She paused. "Your service record lit up some serious flags. Command reached out personally." Julian blinked. "Command?" "JSOC. They vouched for you. Said if Julian Mercer called in a threat, we'd better move fast." She smiled faintly. "Looks like they were right." Julian felt something crack in his chest. The weight of isolation he'd been carrying for weeks suddenly lightened. They hadn't forgotten him. The brotherhood didn't end when you took off the uniform. "The girl," he said quickly. "Emma Hartley. She's right here." Emma's voice came from the trees. She stumbled out, tightened beside her, and ran straight to Julian, throwing her arms around his waist. "I knew you'd save me," she whispered, tears streaming. "I knew it." Julian knelt, pulling her close. "You saved yourself, kid. You were so brave." Torres watched the exchange, her expression softening. "Let's get her to medical. Her mother's been beside herself." "Her mother," Julian said sharply. "Is she safe?" "She's at our command center in town, scared but unharmed." Julian nodded, relief washing through him. More agents were securing the scene, cuffing Voss and Navarro, checking the wounded, photographing evidence. The cabin behind them was fully engulfed now, flames roaring into the night sky. Sheriff Marcus Dalton's cruiser pulled up at the edge of the scene. He climbed out slowly, his face ashen as he took in the FBI presence. Torres turned to him, her expression hardening. "Sheriff Dalton, perfect timing." "Agent Torres, Save it." She gestured to two agents. "Marcus Dalton, you're under arrest for conspiracy, child endangerment, and corruption. We've got recordings of your calls to Victor Crane. You're done." Dalton's face crumbled. I didn't know they'd take a kid. I swear, You sold your badge," Julian said quietly, stepping forward. "You betrayed everything you swore to protect. Whatever happens to you isn't enough." Dalton looked at him, then at Emma, shame and regret warring on his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Tell that to her mother," Julian said. They led Dalton away in cuffs. Torres turned back to Julian. "We're going to need your full statement. But first, there's someone who wants to meet you." A medical van pulled up, and the doors opened. A woman tumbled out, blonde hair disheveled, eyes red from crying. Sarah Hartley. "Emma!" she screamed. "Mom!" They ran to each other, colliding in the snow, Sarah dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into her arms. Sobs tore through both of them, raw and primal. Julian stood back, watching, feeling something warm and painful in his chest. After a long moment, Sarah looked up, her eyes finding Julian's. She stood, one arm still around Emma, and walked over. "You're Julian?" she asked, voice shaking. He nodded. Sarah's lip trembled, then she pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you," she whispered, broken and grateful. "Thank you for bringing her back." Julian returned the embrace awkwardly, not used to this kind of gratitude. "She's a fighter. She did most of the work." Sarah pulled back, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. "They told me you're a Navy SEAL, that you tracked her through a blizzard, that you fought 6 men to protect her." "I had help," Julian said, gesturing to Titan, who sat calmly nearby. Sarah knelt, and the dog allowed her to wrap her arms around his neck. "Thank you too, brave boy." Titan's tail thumped once. Emma tugged on Julian's sleeve. "Are you going to be in trouble? For fighting them?" Torres answered before Julian could. "No. Mr. Mercer acted in lawful defense of a minor in imminent danger. He's a civilian hero." The word felt strange to Julian. Hero. He'd been called a lot of things. Warrior, operator, asset. But hero? That was for people who saved lives because they chose to, not because it was their job, except he wasn't on the job anymore. He'd done this because he couldn't walk away. Maybe that made all the difference. The medics checked Emma thoroughly. Minor hypothermia, dehydration, bruising on her wrists from the zip ties, but nothing that wouldn't heal. They wrapped her in thermal blankets and started an IV, but she refused to leave Julian's side. "He stays," Emma insisted when they tried to load her into the ambulance. Sarah looked at Julian. "Would you mind riding with us, just until she's settled?" Julian climbed into the ambulance, Titan jumping in behind him. The dog settled at Emma's feet, resting his chin on her leg. As they rolled toward town, Emma's eyes started to droop. The adrenaline was fading, exhaustion taking over. "Julian?" she murmured. "Yeah, kid? Will I ever see you again?" He glanced at Sarah, who was watching him with an expression he recognized. The look of someone who'd just realized they owed a debt they could never repay. "I'm not going anywhere for a while," he said softly. "I'll be around." Emma smiled, her eyes closing. "Good, because Titan needs someone to throw the ball for him, and I promised I'd teach him tricks." Julian's chest tightened. "Deal." She drifted off, still holding Captain Fluffles. Sarah reached across and took Julian's hand. "I mean it. Thank you. If you ever need anything—" "You don't owe me," Julian interrupted gently. "Yes, I do. We both do." Julian looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, then at Titan, whose amber eyes reflected quiet satisfaction. For the first time since his leave started, the gnawing emptiness he'd been carrying felt less vast. Maybe the mission hadn't ended. Maybe it had just changed form. The FBI field office in Jackson, Wyoming, smelled of burnt coffee and urgency. Julian sat in a conference room that had been hastily converted into a command center, walls covered with photographs, maps, and evidence boards. He nursed his fourth cup of coffee in 3 hours, the bitter taste keeping exhaustion at bay. His ribs ached where Victor's bullet had grazed him. The medic had cleaned and bandaged the wound, declaring it superficial. Julian had endured worse paper cuts in the field. Special Agent Torres sat across from him, flanked by 2 other federal agents, one from ATF, one from Homeland Security. The seriousness of their expressions told Julian this was bigger than a simple child abduction. "Let's go through it one more time," Torres said, pulling out a digital recorder. "You found Emma Hartley bound in an abandoned cabin. The men who took her were armed, professional, and worked for Victor Crane. What else did you observe?" Julian closed his eyes, replaying the scene. The cabin where they held Emma wasn't random. It was a waypoint. There were tire tracks from multiple vehicles, not just the one truck that came after us. The snow had partially covered them, but I counted at least 3 distinct tread patterns. The ATF agent, a heavy-set man named Kowalski, leaned forward. "Suggesting what?" "Multiple trips to that location over several days. They were using it as a staging area." Torres nodded. "We found something else when we searched the cabin ruins. Buried under the collapsed section was a weapons cache. Military-grade rifles, ammunition, explosives. Serial numbers filed off, but we're running forensics." Julian's jaw tightened. "Gun running. On a massive scale," Kowalski confirmed. "We've been tracking a theft from the National Guard Armory in Casper 6 months ago. 300 rifles, 50 cases of ammunition, and demolition supplies vanished during a routine inventory transfer. No leads, no witnesses, until now." The Homeland agent, a younger woman named Chen, pulled up photographs on a laptop. "Victor Crane is, or was, a legitimate defense contractor. His company provided security consulting to military installations. He had access, credentials, and, most importantly, trust." "Let me guess," Julian said. "He used that access to facilitate the theft, then laundered the weapons through a distribution network." "Exactly," Chen said. "Sheriff Dalton provided local cover, making sure law enforcement looked the other way when shipments moved through the county. We've traced at least 8 transactions over the past 4 months, totaling over $2 million in illegal arms sales." Torres tapped a photograph on the evidence board. Sarah Hartley and her daughter were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cabin she rented was supposed to be a dead drop location for a major shipment. When Crane's men arrived and found them there, they improvised, Julian finished. "Take the kid, leverage the mother's silence, complete the transaction, then clean up." "And you walked into the middle of it," Kowalski said, shaking his head. "Bad luck for them." Julian didn't believe in luck. Who was buying? Torres exchanged glances with her colleagues, then made a decision. "Classified buyers. But I can tell you they're foreign nationals with ties to organizations that have killed American service members. If those weapons had reached their destination—" She didn't finish. Julian's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Brothers and sisters in uniform would have died from bullets stamped U.S. military. The thought made his blood run cold. "Where's the rest of the shipment?" he asked. "That's the problem," Chen said. "We've secured what was at the cabin, but based on the inventory records we've recovered, we're missing over 100 rifles and most of the explosives. Crane had a larger operation running, and we don't know where." Torres leaned forward. "Crane isn't talking. Neither are his men. They've all lawyered up, claiming they were just doing security work and had no knowledge of illegal activities. Without the physical evidence, our case is circumstantial. Julian thought about Emma, about the zip ties around her wrists, about Sarah's broken sobs. They kidnapped a child, attempted murder. That's not circumstantial. True, Torres agreed. But we want the whole network. The buyers, the distribution chain, everyone who made this possible. If we charge them now with what we have, the bigger fish scatter. So, what do you need? Julian asked. Torres pulled out a map of Ridgeline and the surrounding area. We need to find the primary cache before it moves. Crane used Sheriff Dalton to coordinate logistics. We've pulled Dalton's phone records, and there's one location that keeps appearing in his GPS history. He visited it 18 times in the last 2 months, always at night, always alone. She circled a spot on the map, an old mining property 15 miles outside town, deep in the mountains. The Miller property, Julian said, recognizing the name from his earlier tracking. Abandoned since the 80s, Kowalski confirmed, but property records show it was purchased by a shell corporation 3 years ago. We traced the ownership through 6 layers of legal entities before hitting a wall. It's owned by someone with serious resources and serious legal protection. You want me to help you find it, Julian said. It wasn't a question. Torres met his eyes. You know these mountains. You've already proven you can move through hostile territory undetected. And frankly, Crane's operation is larger than we initially thought. He had at least 12 men working for him. Some are in custody, but others are still out there. If they realize we're closing in, they'll move the cache or destroy it. You're asking me to conduct reconnaissance on a potential hostile position, Julian said slowly, as a civilian. I'm asking you to consult, Torres corrected. Guide a tactical team to the location using the terrain knowledge you have. Nothing more. Julian looked at Totten, who lay in the corner of the room, resting but alert. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his name, amber eyes opening. When? Julian asked. First light. We'll have a full tactical team, FBI, HRT, and ATF response unit. You lead us in, we secure the site, we bring everyone home safe. Julian was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the peace he'd come to these mountains seeking, the solitude he'd wanted, the escape from violence. But he also thought about Emma's terrified face, about Sarah's desperate gratitude, about the weapons that would kill Americans if they weren't stopped. Some missions chose you. I need something first, he said. Name it. I want to see Emma and Sarah before we go. Make sure they're okay. Torres smiled faintly. They're in protective custody at a safe house 2 blocks from here. I'll drive you over myself. 20 minutes later, Julian stood outside a modest 2-story home guarded by 2 federal agents. Torres knocked, and after a moment, Sarah Hartley opened the door. Her face lit up when she saw him. Julian, come in. The house was warm, furnished in generic rental fashion, but comfortable. Emma sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, watching cartoons with the volume low. When she saw Julian, she squealed and ran to him. You came back! He caught her in a hug, this small, fierce girl who'd survived something that would have broken most adults. I promised I'd be around, didn't I? Emma pulled back, beaming. Is Titan here? As if summoned, the German shepherd padded through the door. Emma dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around the dog's neck. Titan's tail wagged slowly, patiently enduring the affection. Sarah gestured to the kitchen. Coffee? Always, Julian said. They sat at the small table while Emma and Titan settled back on the couch, the girl already drifting toward sleep again, her small hand buried in the dog's thick fur. "They told me what you're doing tomorrow," Sarah said quietly, "that you're going after the rest of them." Julian sipped the coffee. "Just helping the FBI find a location. Nothing dangerous." Sarah gave him a look that said she knew he was lying but appreciated the effort. "You don't have to keep protecting us, you know. You've done more than enough." "I'm not doing it for you," Julian said, then saw her expression. "I mean, that came out wrong. I'm doing it because if I don't, those weapons end up killing people. Maybe soldiers I served with, maybe civilians like Emma." Sarah reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "You're a good man, Julian Mercer, the kind the world needs more of." Julian looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Most people would have walked past that backpack. Most people would have called it in and gone home. You ran toward danger to save a child you'd never met. That's not anyone. That's a hero." The word still felt wrong, but Julian didn't argue. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Emma called out sleepily, "Julian? Yeah, kid? Promise you'll come back tomorrow. I want to teach Titan to shake hands." Julian looked at the little girl, at the trust in her eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. A responsibility deeper than duty, more personal than mission parameters. "I promise," he said. He meant it. By midnight, the FBI tactical team was assembled in a warehouse on the outskirts of Jackson. 12 operators in full kit, body armor, helmets, night vision, suppressed weapons. They moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals who'd done this 100 times. Julian stood at the front of the room, dressed in borrowed tactical gear that fit reasonably well. Torres had insisted he wear armor, and he hadn't argued. Titan sat at his feet, also outfitted with a K9 tactical vest. Julian pointed to the map projected on the wall. "The Miller property sits at the end of a box canyon. Single-access road, heavily wooded on both sides. If they have sentries, they'll be positioned here and here." He indicated 2 high points, with overlapping fields of fire on the approach. The HRT team leader, a grizzled operator named Briggs, nodded. "How do you suggest we bypass?" Julian traced an alternative route with his finger. "There's an old game trail that runs parallel to the road, about 200 meters east. It's rough terrain, slower going, but it'll bring us in from an unexpected angle. We can scout the perimeter, identify security measures, then coordinate a simultaneous breach." "What about interior layout?" Kowalski asked. "Unknown," Julian admitted. "The property has multiple structures. Main house, equipment sheds, old mining shaft. If I were staging a cache, I'd use the mine. It's underground, climate-controlled, hidden from aerial surveillance." Briggs studied the map. "We'll need eyes on target before we move in. Mr. Mercer, you and your dog up for a recon run?" Julian glanced at Titan. The dog's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "We've done it before." "Good. The main force will stage here." Briggs pointed to a position half a click from the property line. "While you and 1 spotter move forward. You identify security measures, cache location, and number of hostiles. Then we go in hard and fast. Questions?" Julian shook his head. The plan was sound, simple, the kind that worked if everyone did their job and didn't get cocky. "One thing," Julian said, "these aren't amateurs. Voss, Navarro, they were military trained. If there are more like them guarding this site, expect professional resistance." Noted, Briggs said. We'll be ready. The team dispersed to conduct final gear checks. Torres approached Julian. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. You've already done your part. Yes, I do, Julian said simply. She studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Your commanding officer called while you were at the safe house. Admiral Hendricks from JSOS. He said, and I quote, "Tell Ghost he'd better come back in one piece or I'll kick his ass personally." Julian smiled faintly. Ghost, his call sign from his years with SEAL Team 6. He hadn't heard it in months. Tell the Admiral I appreciate the concern. He also said your leave is being extended indefinitely, with full pay, and that if you need anything, you call him directly. Something warm spread through Julian's chest, the Brotherhood remembering one of its own. Thank you, he said. Torres squeezed his shoulder, then walked away to coordinate with her team. Julian knelt beside Titan, running his hands through the dog's thick fur. One more time, buddy, just like old days. Titan's tail thumped once. Ready. At over 400 hours, the convoy of black SUVs rolled out into the pre-dawn darkness. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crystalline and silent under a sky scattered with stars. The temperature had dropped to 0, breath steaming, weapons cold to the touch. Julian rode in the lead vehicle with Briggs and 2 other operators. No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of tires on frozen asphalt. They parked 2 kilometers from the target and moved in on foot, a silent column of ghosts threading through the forest. Julian took point with Titan, reading the terrain with the instincts of someone who'd spent years hunting in places where mistakes meant death. After 40 minutes, they reached the staging position. Julian hand-signaled a halt. The team melted into the underbrush, invisible. Julian and a sniper named Peterson separated from the group, moving forward in a low crawl. Titan stayed glued to Julian's left side, barely disturbing the snow. They crested a ridge and looked down into the box canyon. The Miller property spread out below, 3 buildings arranged around a central yard. Lights burned in the main house. 2 pickup trucks were parked outside, engines cold. But what caught Julian's attention was the large equipment shed nearest the old mine entrance. Fresh tire tracks led to it, deep ones suggesting heavy loads. Julian pulled out a spotting scope and glassed the area. 2 sentries, one on the house porch, smoking a cigarette, another patrolling between buildings, rifle slung casually. 2 visible hostiles, Julian whispered into his radio. Likely more inside. Briggs's voice crackled back. Can you confirm cache location? Julian shifted his scope to the equipment shed. The door was steel, reinforced. Security camera mounted above it. Too much protection for an empty building. Equipment shed, north side, multiple security measures, high-value target. Copy, hold position, we're moving in. Julian and Peterson waited, breath fogging the cold air. Titan's eyes tracked the sentries below, calculating, waiting for the command. The tactical team split into 3 elements, approaching from different angles. They moved like shadows, using every depression in terrain, every tree for cover. The sentry on the porch flicked his cigarette into the snow, turned to go inside, and froze. Julian saw it through his scope, the man's head cocking, sensing something wrong. Contact, Julian whispered. North sentry alert. The man reached for his radio. Peterson's suppressed rifle coughed once. The sentry dropped, a tranquilizer dart in his neck. But the damage was done. Someone inside the house shouted. Go loud, Briggs ordered. Flashbangs detonated. Doors crashed open. The quiet night exploded into chaos. Julian and Peterson scrambled down the ridge, Titan bounding ahead. They reached the equipment shed just as a door opened and a man stumbled out, reaching for a weapon. Titan hit him like a missile, driving him to the ground. The man screamed once before Julian arrived, knee in his back, zip ties securing his wrists. "Shed clear," Julian reported. He kicked open the door, Titan surging inside. What they found made Julian's blood run cold. Crates, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling, military stenciling visible on each one, U.S. Army, handle with care. And in the back, partially assembled, was something worse. A shoulder-fired missile launcher, the kind used to down helicopters. "We've got stingers," Julian said into his radio, voice tight. "Repeat, enemy has anti-aircraft missiles." Torres's voice came back, shaken. "How many?" Julian counted quickly. "At least 6 launchers. God knows how many missiles." If these had reached their buyers, American helicopters would have fallen from the sky. Soldiers would have died. But they didn't, because a Navy SEAL on leave had found a child's backpack in the snow. Sometimes fate was strange that way. 6 months after the raid on the Miller property, Julian stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., wearing his dress blues for the first time in months. Admiral Hendricks had personally called to order him to attend this ceremony, making it clear that "strongly encouraged" meant "you will be there or I'll drag you myself." The room was filled with military brass, federal officials, and media. Julian hated every second of the attention. But this wasn't about him. Agent Torres stepped to the microphone first. 6 months ago, a routine investigation into missing military weapons became one of the most significant counterterrorism operations in recent history. We recovered weapon systems that, had they reached their intended buyers, would have resulted in catastrophic loss of American life overseas. She paused, looking directly at Julian. That recovery was possible because one man refused to walk past a child's backpack in the snow. Because one man, on leave and seeking peace, chose instead to run toward danger. Because one man remembered that the oath he swore doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Admiral Hendricks took the podium next. Julian Mercer served with SEAL Team 6 for 12 years, 73 combat deployments, 5 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, more classified, citations than I'm allowed to mention. He is, by any measure, one of the finest warriors this nation has ever produced. The Admiral's voice grew softer. But what happened in Wyoming wasn't about being a warrior. It was about being a man who still believes in protecting those who cannot protect themselves. It was about character. And that's why today we're not honoring the SEAL. We're honoring the civilian who remembered why he served in the first place. Julian accepted another medal, this time the Secretary of Defense Medal for Valor, a civilian award rarely given and deeply meaningful. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a young Marine corporal approached him in the hallway. "Sir," the Marine said, standing at attention, "I just wanted to say, some of those weapons you recovered, they were headed to the region where my unit is deploying next month. You might have saved my life without ever knowing my name." "Thank you." Julian shook the Marine's hand and, in that moment, understood. This was why. Not for medals or recognition or ceremonies, for the Marine who'd deploy and come home, for the pilot who wouldn't get shot down, for the child who'd grow up with her mother, for all the lives saved by someone refusing to walk past when evil showed its face. 1 year later, Julian Mercer stood in his workshop, building a wooden toy chest for Emma's 10th birthday. Titan lay nearby, graying now round the muzzle but still alert, still protective. The door opened. Sarah stepped inside, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "It's late," she said gently. "Almost done," Julian replied, sanding the last edge smooth. She set down the mugs and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "She's gonna love it." "I hope so." Sarah rested her chin on his shoulder. "I was thinking, maybe we could make this official, the 3 of us. What do you think?" Julian turned to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope. "Official how?" "However you want. I'm not picky about labels. I want you to know you're family now. You and Titan. You're ours, and we're yours." Julian set down the sandpaper and pulled her close. "I think that sounds perfect." They stood together in the warm workshop, sawdust hanging in the air, Titan's soft snoring the only sound. Outside, the mountains stood silent under stars, keeping their ancient watch. And inside, a warrior who'd spent 15 years fighting in the dark finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Light. Not the absence of darkness, but the presence of love. Not the end of vigilance, but the beginning of peace. Not a retreat from duty, but an expansion of it. From protecting a nation to protecting a family. Somewhere out there, other warriors were still fighting. Other dogs were still tracking. Other children still needed saving. But tonight, for this moment, Julian Mercer was exactly where he needed to be. Home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Titan's loyalty, Julian's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.